Okay, I'm muting and I'm gonna.
Okay. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us with Evan Purchell, the director of Ask Anybody. We also have on our panel George Mansour, who is the founder of the Boston LGBT Film Festival and someone who booked films for over 60 years in Boston. We're also joined by Joan Alakwa, who is the executive director of the Boston History Project, which is a LGBT archive in Boston, and also Michael Bronski, who is author, cultural investigator, and author. And we're glad to have everyone involved. And thank you all for coming. And please, if you could, leave me some questions in the chat box, because we would love to sort of get your input as well. Everyone's mics are muted, but the conversation will continue. So I guess my first question for Evan, as the filmmaker, is, one, I want to say I am completely envious of this project still. I watched it again for probably the third time this afternoon, and saw new things. I love, for me, it's a sort of a fantasy project as a filmmaker to have that much found footage and to kind of like discern all of the sort of the scenes that you did. And you had such a sort of like playful hand and also a very thoughtful hand of your sort of selection of imagery and sort of the culture that was happening in the 70s and 80s. Can you talk a little bit about your sort of process and how you sort of chose the footage that you did?
Sure. It took me a long time to kind of figure out like what approach I was going to take when I was putting it together. I knew I needed to make something that was about an hour long for this festival here in Austin, and I didn't want it to be just a bunch of random clips put together like a mixtape or something like that. And I was really thinking about how, if you read any sort of academic writing about these films, it's always about how they're documentary, how they're very much like documentaries about sexuality and what it was like back then. So I figured, if I have all this documentary footage, could I reconstruct a day in the life back in that era, and what would that look like as reflected through the fantasy of the films? So that was kind of my process for putting it together. And then from there, it was just, kind of creating a bunch of different sections. Like, here's the pier section, here's the subway section, here's the party section, here's the bar section, here's the bath section, and working on all those separately, and then kind of finding a way to link them together through all the footage.
I mean, you did such a like a genius job of sort of connecting everything with so much humor and so much dancing. I was like, yeah, we were dancing in the 70s, which we definitely were. So, because disco had its sort of heyday. So, tell me what first off, tell me about where the footage came from, and talk a little bit about the archive that you got the footage from.
Sure. I kind of scrounged from wherever I could. A lot of the films I got were, available online. Some of them I had to buy tapes to get and digitize them myself. I have a friend who's a gay blog who's been running like a gay porn blog for like decades now. He mailed me tapes from Provincetown just so I can digitize them so I could use the footage. A couple of the films that I used in it, I could not find an actual tape copy of the actual film, so I had to pull from the trailer for the film from like a preview tape that these companies would release with just nothing but trailers to get people to order more films. So it was just kind of scrounging wherever I could, digitizing whatever I could. I think I digitized probably 40 to 50 films.
Wow!
In the process of putting it together, so
Bijou Video is going to love you for all that digitization. And please tell me that you have a digitized full version of Subway, because I was like, all the footage of the subway scenes in New York is a lot of it's from this film Subway.
Yeah, I got that from Something Weird Video.
Yeah,
they have a really good looking version of it out there.
I actually have a VHS copy of it that I bought in the Combat Zone in Boston.
Oh wow!
So maybe this will be a question for Joan. Maybe talk a little bit about the Combat Zone and what it meant for LGBT identity in Boston.
Sure. Well, I can chime in. I think Michael actually is the expert here on that question.
Oh
But
dear.
the the combat zone is sort of a neighborhood. What we're talking about now in contemporary Boston is sort of that theater district, almost Chinatown, Washington Street area. And for a long time, I think I would say after the demise of Scully Square, that was where most of the salacious businesses and activities took place in Boston. So bars, adult film houses, theaters, strip clubs, among other legal and illegal activities. And I think Michael can expound more on that than I can. It's a little before my time.
I can, and George can as well, I'm sure. But the combat zone had it, while it was very gay in many ways, right? Because it had two bathhouses, the club baths on LaGrange Street, where I actually worked for over 2 years, and there was another bath, I forget the name of it, further down. Not the one on Otis Street, but it's further down. And there was a two major gay bars, Playland and Carnival. But what people forget, there were all these cinemas that showed heterosexual porn movies that were essentially cruising places for gay men, right? There may have been some heterosexual men going to the Pilgrim to watch the porn movies, the sort of heterosexual ones, but it was basically just a cruising place for gay men. So it was literally crawling with gay men. And most of the peep shows, some had some gay loop movies, and loops were like, you would put in a quarter and watch a 6-minute loop, and then you put another quarter to find out what happened. Most of those were cruising places, right? So although there were only one, like the two bathhouses and the art cinema, right, which was George may have booked for a while, which was a little bit further up on
Washington,
Tremont, right?
Tremont, right.
Right, was right up on Tremont, right? That although the zone was completely gay in many ways, it actually had very few overtly gay things in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There was a peep show booth, very famous, called the Joel R. Cinema on the corner of Washington and Essex, I believe, right up the block from Playland. That was just the destination place for many people from across the state. With their and you would not put in a quarter, you would put in a little token that you would buy.
Was it a gay peep or a straight one?
It changed back and forth for many years. For many years, it was straight. Then they began doing some gay films, and there were plenty of pornographic bookshops all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
That had straight and gay films, but with like peep shows in the back room, and those were cruising places, of course, too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Art Cinema was the movie house that I booked on Tremont Street. And it was in the building that used to be the Hotel Terrain. And it was a twin cinema. But we decided, the people I worked for, that we wouldn't go all gay. One side would be gay, the other side was going to be Black exploitation. It was a very bad idea. And the two films that we used, one of them, a film that premiered at the South Station Cinema, much to John Waters' chagrin, was Pink Flamingos, which was supposed to be the gay side. But the other side, the Black side, was Jimmy Cliff in The Harder They Come. The harder they come to most gay people coming to buy a ticket, they thought that certainly should have been the gay movie, but it was not. It was a very good movie, but it was not what they expected.
There has to be a porn parody out there somewhere of that.
There actually is a gay movie called The Harder They Fall, but no relation.
That's nice.
I think the other thing about the combat zone that people sort of romanticize it, but it actually was quite dangerous. There were pickpockets. There were people often overtly or more covertly threatening you. There was a famous murder of a Harvard football player in 1977, where people were arrested and sentenced, I believe, to the death penalty, and then it was appealed because the jury was a rigged jury. But it, and I was there a lot. Well, I was there a lot, but I was there a lot at night after I left the bathhouse at 2 a.m, and it was rough.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a playground. It was more like a bit of a jungle.
But I also think like that sort of romanticization sort of exists in the film as well, with the sort of like the Chelsea Piers. I mean, there was the spray graffiti with the pockets, watch your wallet and stuff like that. And that Evan, maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of the choice of using the piers as sort of like a cultural touchstone.
Yeah, I mean, the general idea for that sequence is just that it shows up in so many different films, and it is something that people really kind of know a lot about. So that's why I figured I'd kind of start off with that. But I guess with the sort of romanticization, I guess that's something that I'm still kind of a little nervous about with the film, because I'm not really a nostalgic person, and I don't want to try to make people think that everything was hunky-dory back then. So that's throughout the film. That's why I kind of try to kind of poke at the fantasy of it and showing that this is all fantasy. What you're seeing the best possible version of going to the piers or going to Times Square or going cruising on the subway. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was interesting too, because I mean, you definitely punctuated all the sort of the positive narrative. You had this moment where it was like, I think there was like the long-haired hustler walking through Times Square, and then he's up against the wall, and the guy's like, he's kind of not interested in like hooking up, and the guy is like, chews him out, really, basically.
Yeah.
I thought that was really kind of funny. Like, I mean, it was funny for them to put it in a movie, like an adult movie, but it was also like, it was such a funny like moment too in your narrative. To sort of like show this sort of like that everything isn't necessarily cut and dry or safe or accessible, really. Which was kind of a really good sort of like, it took you away a little bit, but also like it kind of reminded you that, oh, everything isn't all fantasy.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
I had a question that I think is an interesting jump off of that. The idea of like, what is the film necessarily romanticizing? But in the scene in the public bathroom, the two men who are there, and then the door opens and they jump apart. And it just made me, it was one of those moments that actually, it was pretty jarring, because a lot of the sex leading up to that is really sensual, and there's a lot of touching and a lot of time taken. And then there's this sort of this public encounter. And so I'm wondering, from a historic kind of point of view, how dangerous was cruising, and how dangerous was public sex then? And, was it common to get caught in these places?
It was very dangerous. I would forget public sex. I was at a private party, 19 years old, in a private apartment, having sex with a sailor when the place was raided. And I was arrested, taken to, kept overnight in jail. And my father had to come and bail me out. That was a traumatic experience at 19 years old. So it was not an easy thing to survive.
Yeah, and I have many friends. I actually was never arrested, even though I could have been, but I have many friends who were arrested at the bathrooms at Jordan Marsh or the bathrooms at the public library. In fact, the public library was so scandalous at one point that there were demonstrations against the police for actually entrapping people. And I'm sure it was worse in other cities, actually. I'm sure Boston was actually a nicer place.
Well, you went through the courtyard, which was a culturally calming effect to get through the men's room.
Right.
And I worked in the periodical department of the public library. And my boss was gay. And we would watch as people past the doorway, and he would prod me and say, go after that one. And I would go in and cruise them and come back and report what I had seen or what had happened. David Cotton, do you remember him, Michael?
Yes. And I think it was different for every place. There's a building, it's still there, on just outside of Harvard Yard, called Payne Hall, which is the music building that was perfect for cruising, because the men's room was at the end of a very long hallway, so you could always hear people walking down the hallway before they got to the door.
Yes.
You could always be warned. But I mean, George is completely right. It was completely dangerous. People got arrested. People's lives were actually ruined.
Right.
I mean, George was accepted to college, except that they turned you down because you had an arrest record.
Exactly. I had been valedictorian at Boston Latin School, and they said they couldn't possibly, BU couldn't possibly take me as a student because I would be a moral danger to the rest of the students. They didn't mention the professors, but I would have been after them too. So, so I never went to college. Oh well.
Yeah. A lot of bills. Evan,
That's myself a lot of money.
Exactly. So Evan, so talk a little bit about like because there was a huge sort of bathroom cruising scene on, you know, where you found the footage, what was your sort of like, because it was this sort of like, it felt very eventful, and then it was kind of broken up at the end by the sort of, you got the jarring, but you also got the sort of there's a confrontation between Richard Bach and some other guy in a bathroom too. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the sort of bathroom tension, I guess would be the right word.
So I think that sequence, it's almost kind of a like almost a tribute to this one filmmaker, Steve Scott, who in reading interviews about him and with him, he always said that he never put his personal life into his films, but at the same time, he always put a scene where someone cruises someone in a public toilet. So I like to think that it was kind of a personal obsession of his. So literally, I think 7 or 8 of the movies that are used in that sequence are all by him. And also, I think I didn't realize it until like I was like deep into editing the film, that I realized that 4 or 5 of those movies were all shot in the same bathroom. and then I was going through, I was looking at a review of one of them from, I think it was 1978, by John Carr in the Bay Area Reporter, and he actually complains about seeing the same bathroom showing up in all these movies. So it's something that didn't go unnoticed at the time.
The tile on the floor was the same, correct?
It was the same glory hole.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that the decoration on the glory hole changes film to film, so you can almost track the evolution of the graffiti.
We at Wicked Queer in the Boston, George has a very good glory hole story. If you want to share that with everyone, George.
Oh, well, when we went to a gay program at the South Station Cinema, I instructed our people who did our maintenance to go into the men's room and drill a hole about midway up waist high with a bevel, and my boss wanted to know what that would do. And I said, it'll add $1,000 a week to the gross. And he thought about that for a moment, and he said, what if we drill 2 holes? And I said, no, that's not going to work. 1 hole will be enough. And just recently, a group of Canadian doctors have you read the thing about their promoting glory hole sex as a good thing for the coronavirus era?
What a world we live in.
Glory holes are making a comeback, 2020.
I love it.
Everything that's old is new again.
Exactly. Glory holes across the country.
Exactly.
I mean, one thing I think is really interesting, as somebody who thinks about culture over a long period, right, is that most of the filmmakers, I imagine, were probably gay men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the the companies that actually distributed them, the people that George worked with, the theaters were not owned by gay people.
Oh,
Right, so
absolutely.
it's one of these odd things where actually the cultural product is actually from the gay community, but the entire network around it, or syndicate around it,
Yeah.
is actually hostile to gay stuff.
Out as a gay man in the business world at that time, 1969 or so. And it didn't matter, I was in the movie business, which was supposed to be more liberal. It wasn't. It was just as hidebound as any other business. And the fact that I was openly gay worked for me and against me too. So it worked. It worked well. It worked well. And we exploited other minorities. We had an area of Black films. We made movies like Born Black, which we bought in Europe. We made horror movies like Lost House on the Left, which was one of the movies that the company that I worked for produced. So we were making horror movies, movies for minorities, and gays just happened to be another one of that group that they could make a lot of money from exploiting.
Right. And I suspect the good news, right, was that they didn't care what was in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
No.
At all, so that the gay filmmaker had a wide range of what they could do and actually get away with.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, Evan, I was going to say that this is a good, like, what was in going through all the footage and stuff like that, what was your sort of like, because there was that sort of like freedom to put whatever in, what was your sort of favorite moment? I know you're not supposed to have a favorite moment at all, but, you know, we all have our little darlings.
I mean, I think my whole, it's something I never really thought of until I was really starting to put it together, but I think my favorite little subgenre within the genre is porn at Pride. Just seeing Pride Parade show up in, you know, all these different movies. In different contexts too, you know, sometimes it's, you know, someone cruises someone at a Pride Parade, or sometimes it's just, oh, we're at the Pride Parade, or it was really fascinating seeing footage of Harvey Milk show up in one of these films, you know, in hindsight from 2020. But that's, I think, one of my favorite things, you know.
Yeah, no, it features prominently in the movie too, which is really kind of nice because it reminds us that not only are we sexual beings and a sexual minority, we're also a political beings and a political minority. And I think that's also important to remind everyone, and also, you know, to continue that tradition. So thank you. That I feel like that's like amazing that you kind of gleaned all that out of there.
Yeah, like a really good example of that is Artie Bresson's Passing Strangers, which actually ends at a Pride Parade.
Yeah.
Kind of signifying that these two characters are starting to become more politically active with their relationship that's kind of been growing over the course of the movie.
Yes.
Right. And it's also used in a very natural thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same year too.
Yeah.
And we played the Artie Bresson movie at the Orson Welles, which was another place that I was programming at the time. I mean, at the time I was doing the Orson Welles, the Nickelodeon, and the South Station Cinema. So I was a busy little boy.
Do we have any questions from all that are gathered? Anybody, please type in some questions. We'd love to hear from you. You've got a captive panel here. So maybe Evan, so what is sort of next for the film? You know, you're on the festival circuit now. Are you planning on putting it onto physical media yourself? Like, what's the sort of trajectory for it?
I'm still not entirely sure about physical media. Kind of one of my intentions was for this to be like a social thing for people to like watch together, and COVID has kind of put a damper on that a bit. But yeah, I'm just seeing kind of where it's going. I honestly, when I finished it, I didn't know there was going to be much interest in it, but so I've been really amazed that people have really been into it. A friend of mine and I launched a podcast a couple weeks ago, which is going through each of the movies that I used in the movie. So we're diving a little deeper into the history. And I'm still currently trying to work on a couple of different book ideas,
Awesome.
building up all the research.
So the question from the chat is, Jim says, it's curious about this notion of nostalgia, and if you, Evan, got caught up in that or ended up being more critical, and especially approaching it with a more modern kind of like lens for it.
With a little bit of A, a little bit of B, I guess. Are there things in these films that I think is like really wonderful? Yes, of course. But at the same time, I do realize that, again, like we were talking about, you know, it was dangerous back then. These movies were made in the middle of, you know, the fight against Anita Bryant, the rise in gay bashing, a lot of good and bad, really. I mean, so I try to balance that in the film and try to kind of create as accurate of a picture as I can using things that are fantasy.
Right. Well,
And that's why I was gonna say that's why the end of the film is, you know, it's revealed that you're watching a film, a dream within a film within a film. Just to like underscore, it's fantasy.
I love that you ran out of film at the end. that was like, that's great.
Right. Also, I think it's probably impossible not to have nostalgia for all these films made before the advent of HIV/AIDS.
Sure.
Because that's such a 1981, or say by the time 81 is the first report, but after say 82 or 83, by the time the cultural production catches up, right? It's like looking at movies before the Holocaust begins. You can't help but make that decisive break historically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for these movies, right, they just, I mean, whether it's the piers, whether it's the bathrooms, whether it's the subways, whether it's, you know, Times Square, it's a different world.
Absolutely.
Literally a different world.
Yeah.
That was a question that, so I reached out to a bunch of my younger gay male friends who are more well-versed in contemporary pornography than I am. And that's something that we were sort of talking through was there's a lot of these very sensual scenes in the movie, and it seems like they're taking a lot of time in these places where you probably weren't taking that much time having sex, and we wondered about, is there sort of a yearning or something there that the filmmakers are doing, because in reality you might not be spending a long time at the piers, or maybe you were spending a long time at the piers, I don't know.
You were.
So yeah. Were you? Yeah.
Days, hours, yes.
Okay. We were comparing that to like now there's Boy Beach or the Dick Dock in Provincetown.
Right.
And you're spending time, but you're not spending days and hours. Most people, I think, aren't spending days and hours. And so that was kind of, we were wondering, so is that true to life, that these encounters were drawn out, or?
Is that for me?
That's sure, Michael.
I think it depends on the location. I think in public bathrooms, they had to be quick because somebody may come in and there may be police, or you may be interrupted by somebody who's just coming onto you by accident. You know, I think a place like cruising, even the Victory Gardens and the Reeds during the day in the 70s and 80s, right? People would be there for hours walking around and cruising. And the piers, I actually had friends in New York who would, sound sort of sad, who would literally pack a lunch and go to the piers for the day. Well, because you didn't want to leave, and so they had a knapsack with some sandwiches in it.
Well, there's always someone waiting around the corner. I mean, you don't want to lose that.
Yes, and Mr. Right could possibly come in. So I think that at the piers, it actually is possible to have sex for with somebody for an hour if you were both into it. In a bathroom, much less so.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I mean, I think that, and I'd love to hear what Evan thinks about this, right? That it seems to me that sort of, speaking about sensuality, that in fact the decisive break comes aesthetically when people stop using film and begin using video.
I would say so. Yeah, it's really a whole like entirely, it's an entire shift when film
Yeah.
goes away and it turns into video. You start the use of like the locations that you see in these films. It just goes from that to just being bedrooms,
Yeah.
apartments, things like that, and it really kind of turns more into like a sort of slam bang sort of thing. Um, there's no real reason to kind of like set up an entire plot, or to like establish characters or to do all these different things. The people who are buying these expensive tapes, they know what they want and that's what they're going to get.
Yeah.
Evan, did you look at any foreign language films? Like, of course, Taxi Zum Klo. Did you look at that as a classic German film?
I didn't use anything from that, but I did use, I think, 3 or 4 French gay porn films that were, some of them were shot in New York, but I think 2 of them were shot in Paris. And they were all released theatrically in America too. So it's interesting that France was really the only country outside the U.S. that had a gay porn industry, and part of that was because of hand-in-hand films and the relaxation of censorship over there. But the UK didn't have a porn industry. Germany, Italy, none of those other countries had industries like France or the U.S. So.
Mm-hmm. Right, because certainly Peter Jerome's Adam and Eve's, I believe, takes place both in France and in the U.S. I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the Peter Jerome movies are very interesting, and they have an artistic bent to them that the other films of that era did not. And in fact, there was a Peter Jerome movie that he came to the U.S. to film for us, and he filmed it in a subway car, and it was a sex film that was filmed at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when we thought we could get away with having hardcore sex in the New York subway system. And it was a remarkable achievement for him, a technical achievement. Put it that way.
So that's audacious. I love it.
I think my favorite part about that film, and I put it in my film, is that at the very end of the scene, when they're done having sex and they're kind of scurrying back to like their seats, there just happened to be a newspaper there, and the guy picks it up, and the headline is "There no sense of decency?"
Yes, that was perfect.
I know there was a lot of humor in vintage porn, and I think that you kind of captured a little bit of that. There's like some transition moments where you're using like signage that was like from the bathhouse. That was kind of funny, and you knew it kind of came from the sort of narrative of the film too. So I love that sort of like artistic sort of license to sort of like shoot whatever you want. And I personally am nostalgic for that sort of that film aesthetic, because I appreciate that more than just the bedroom with the video camera and the
Oh yeah,
thank you, ma'am. I like a story. There's a question from the panel is, the sex scenes involve almost entirely white men, save for one all-black scene. Can Evan or the others talk about how racial diversity was included or not included in the films that we saw?
Yeah, it's interesting. As bad as some things about the video industry, where it's not until the 80s and the rise of video that you start seeing more diversity and representation in these titles. In the 70s, there was a market, and that market was for gay white men. The only time you really see people of color in these films, it's very fetishized. Like that, the all black scene in my film is from a Peter Jerome film, and he was always on record as saying that he had kind of a fetish for people of color. So, and that scene itself is very interesting because it's set at a screening of a blaxploitation movie at the Lincoln Art Theater in New York. So it has all these racial connotations onto it. There's like that funk song that's in the film that's from that film. And it's kind of playing with those tropes a little bit. But I tried to get as much representation into my film as I could, but all you can really do is work with what you got.
Anybody else want to comment on sort of the racial diversity back then?
No, I think that's true, and I think that when later on, when video happens, that there are more and more films featuring Latinx men or African American men. Almost in my memory, almost so I actually know these well because I actually reviewed porn for the guide for about 10 years. So I actually watched hundreds and hundreds of films, right? And it's always, I remember watching one in which the two black men were having sex and it was on a sort of a tiger rug.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just horrible. I mean, just horrible. But not to dump on the porn industry, right? But gay fiction of that time is all white as well. I mean, we all know, in fact, the gay world was incredibly diverse in so many ways, but the representations were pretty much all for white middle-class gay men or white middle-class gay men pretending to be working-class butch, and we're probably white middle-class gay men.
Well,
You know, so it's not just the porn industry, right? It's actually everything.
right. Peter Jerome did have a fetish for black men. He was quite interested in them sexually. And I'm surprised he didn't use them more in his films, but he was interested in real life and black men.
So maybe just circle back to kind of what you mentioned about sound and soundtrack is kind of describe your choices for the soundtrack, because I really enjoyed the soundtrack in many ways, because it was a lot of that found in your sort of unarchiving.
I didn't add anything to the film. Everything that's in there is from the actual films. That's one of the things I also find really interesting about these films from like a cinematic viewpoint is that the people who were making them knew that no one would ever admit to going to see them. And the budgets were so low that for the most part, they would just take whatever they wanted to use. So you will hear Pink Floyd and the Beatles, and I heard Steve Reich in one film. And it's always fascinating to see the way that they're able to kind of recontextualize, you know, this popular music into a completely different context. So everything that's in my film is from the original films.
I love the sort of the moment of the, maybe it was from the promo for Heat Stroke. And it just reminds me of like Joe Gage is one of my like sort of like inspirations as a filmmaker, and his use of sound is often quite genius and lovely and layered. That even the promo sort of had like, I don't know if even the promo sound had that sort of like out of body sort of astral sort of like quality to it.
Well, that's one of the few with an original soundtrack by the hip hop or the electro artist Man Parrish, and that's how his career started. It's because of that movie. Some DJ at a gay club in New York like bootlegged the title track from a film print, and he heard it playing at a club one night. I was like, how did they get a hold of this? And that's how he got his record label. It's because of his song for that film.
It's amazing. He had a great career too. So, a question from the chat. From Jeffrey Hannah, one of the most fascinating aspects of the film for me is its non-immediately sexual scenes. What are the context of some of your favorite of those scenes in the movie?
Oh God, there's so many. I think my favorite sort of non-sexual scene in the entire thing is the party sequence, which is mostly from Tom DeSimone's Confessions of a Male Groupie. Which is a really early hardcore film. It doesn't really have a lot of sex in it, but the entire last 20 minutes or so is just this party sequence that I kind of lifted entirely and just kind of carved out and put other little pieces in so that it wouldn't just be the same thing. But it's such that whole sequence is so much about community and this sort of subculture of freaks just, you know, having a great time together, and I really love that.
I mean, you really kind of like painted this world of sort of like the sort of socialization and gathering, and I don't know if it's because I've been quarantined and stuff like that. I really kind of gravitated towards that sort of like you know, gathering in spaces and sort of that sort of like aspect of it, where, you know, we have bars and sometimes there's social clubs and stuff like that, but it's not the same as it was then to like sort of like, you know, really kind of carve yourself out of space to kind of like gather. I appreciate that. Use of that. Another question from the chat is, how is your, I know that you're kind of getting started with festivals and programming this. Have you had any sort of like hiccups or festivals that won't program it because of its graphicness, or I mean, we love sex here at Wicked Queer, so there's not ever a problem. But I'm sure there are some festivals that might not, be comfortable with programming something like that, and kind of talk about your sort of experience with that.
Sure. I get that every festival has its own audience, so I don't want to be too like mean or rude or bitchy or anything. I do find it funny though when a festival will show like 4 pro cop or military things, but not something like mine. But I mean, I will say I've been really surprised that festivals have been interested in it. I know I said it earlier, but when I was finished with the film, I kind of thought, maybe I could get like 1 or 2 screenings at like at an art space or something. I never thought it'd have a festival run. I never thought, the BFI would be playing it, or Wicked Queer would be playing it, or some of the other festivals that we have lined up would be playing it. So it's really taken me by surprise.
Well, I mean, one of the things that sort of like, I mean, again, that appealed to us as, to program it is just the sort of like, I mean, it does represent all this sort of history, and it is a document. It's a documentary, as you have said, and that's the thing that I really kind of get from it too. And I get your sort of the sort of being sort of a cultural historian and sort of telling that kind of story. And I'm always looking for, as someone who does programming, looking for that sort of connection to the past, and because the past always has a little bit of lessons to learn, whether good or bad. And I always feel like we live in a time that everything is very fast, although maybe not at this moment, but things move pretty fast, and histories are often revised and erased and changed. And I feel like kind of keeping those sort of like cultural touchstones and that those memories alive is really important. And maybe you could kind of talk a little bit more about sort of your thought to sort of like kind of keep the history alive.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really kind of got me interested in these films was realizing that there is almost this hidden history of queer cinema. I've heard all my life that, there wasn't much queer cinema before the mid 80s at earliest, or the early 90s with the new queer cinema. But then like kind of discovering these films and seeing like, oh, here are these filmmakers that are tackling, coming out, gay relationships, monogamy versus promiscuity, gay marriage, gay horror films, gay comedies, gay action movies. Just seeing that there is, all this stuff out there, and I think really kind of adds a lot to, queer cinema as a whole. It kind of almost became my mission to like, get this stuff out there more, so that it's not just, buried on dusty VHS tapes, or, in, yellowed back issues of like The Advocate, or, other weeklies or newspapers. Which for the Instagram, that was kind of the impetus for my Instagram, was to get this imagery back out there, and not just, on, buried in archives.
We shouldn't be burying archives. And I also hope that this inspires modern filmmakers to make more genre films. I mean, that's something that I'm really kind of interested in. There's a comment in addition to the sort of about the festival comment about it was funny in our programming to watch this back to back with Dry Wind, because Dry Wind is very much like this sort of like almost like genre film, but it kind of defines genre, but it's also very like, it's like an erotic narrative as well. But that might do better in a festival than your film, which is kind of weirdly preposterous. So I mean, it's kind of, it's one of those things. It's like, I feel like the sexuality shouldn't put people off, but I do understand people's uncomfortableness with the sexuality.
I mean,
Sure.
I think. Oh, Evan, go on.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, kind of the reason why I cut it the way I did it too is I didn't want it to linger on the sex too much. I never wanted it to get bogged down with sex or to become boring. But at the same time, like, people have told me, you should make like a softer version of this, and it's like, what's the point of, trying to show what like pure cruising could have been like if you can't show what it was actually like, or what tea room cruising was like if you can't show what it was actually like. So it is kind of like a struggle between showing too much and showing too little.
Do you have any aspiration of playing this very briefly in commercial houses?
I'd love to.
Maybe in New York City for a week, limited?
I can't show it where I live because there's a Texas has the Texas Alcohol Bureau has a law, like a very dated law about venues that serve alcohol can't show material that could be considered obscene. And because every movie theater here serves alcohol and has like a full bar, it's literally banned from playing in Austin. But if any venue out there wants to play it, I'd love to have it.
Well, there's a Angelica movie house in Austin.
Yeah.
And I programmed for them.
And actually, we were going to have a week-long run at Anthology Film Archives in New York, but COVID kind of scuttled that for now. We was going to play with a couple of different films that I had used in my film, including a couple of brand new restorations that were being done just for those shows. So hopefully we can reschedule that once things kind of return to some sense of normal.
Sounds like an awesome program.
Yeah.
At the Anthology.
There are also the new versions of the restored versions of some of the Artie Bresson movies too.
We were going to be showing
very well.
Yeah, we were going to be showing Forbidden Letters as part of that. We're going to be premiering that.
Mm-hmm.
It was that, and we were going to had new restorations of Joe Gage's El Paso Wrecking Corporation and Peter Berlin's That Boy, and then a couple other films. So it was like a whole program that I spent like a couple months putting together, and then it just fell apart because of COVID. So hopefully in the future.
If you get it online.
Yeah.
We'll show it. If any more questions, please put them in the chat. Does our panel have any more questions for Evan? Or Evan, do you have any questions for our panel?
Yeah, actually, I'd love to hear anything you might have to say about your work with Hand in Hand, George.
Sorry?
Maybe Evan, repeat that. George, Evan's interested in your work in your history with Hand in Hand films. Can you hear us, George?
What? I have bad hearing. So.
Sorry. Evan was asked the question of just your history with starting Hand in Hand films, and if you could talk a little bit about that.
Tell me again. I'm sorry.
Your work with Hand in Hand films.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, Jack DeVoe was a good friend, and he decided when I found that we were doing business with the films, we decided to back some of them, to promote them, and to pay for the films themselves. And I would go down to New York with a roll of cash. Believe it, we could make a film for $15,000 complete. And I'd go to the set, which was in a warehouse, appropriately. And they would say, well, this is the money man from Boston. I never cashed in on that. What an idiot I was. So actually, it was better that I didn't, because I probably would be dead now with the really gorgeous hunks that were performing there, and I was the money man coming in.
It also could be considered sexual harassment on the workplace too.
Oh yes, that would be awful to do that. And I wouldn't tell Joe, my lover back in Boston, that I was never tempted. I just went down there and it was strictly business. Jack DeVoe and I decided to make a movie with the director of a film I wondered whether Evan looked at, called Pink Narcissus, was billed as by anonymous. The director was anonymous. And it was a very beautiful film, but it was stupid beyond belief. But we got him, and we gave him money to make a feature-length film. And what he delivered was about 20 minutes of lots of spangles and sequins and drapes. And we had no idea what we were going to do with this. The money was all used up in production values. It was the Cecil B. DeMille of gay sex movies. So it was left up to me to go through all our old films and pick out the hardcore pieces and insert them into this 20 minutes of beautiful young men. And we renamed it The Good Hot Stuff. I don't know whether you came upon that or not.
Oh, I love that documentary. It's such a fascinating historical piece.
Hey, it's me. It's me.
I was going to say, when Sean asked about the Q&A, I recognized your name from the credits from that.
And there was the only one that I allowed. And they could do anything they wanted. I mean, they were paying me money that I would never have made anyplace else as a openly gay man with no college education. And they would put me on their leases because they were good family men. And so that if they were raided or the movie house was closed down, it would be my name that would be splashed in the newspaper. But they figured, the fuck, the faggot doesn't need, he doesn't have any rights. Fortunately, it worked out well because now I have almost $4 million in the bank.
Yeah, no, I'd always kind of wondered the backstory behind that documentary and that James Bidgood film that's in it.
That was it. We gave him all the money and he spent it all on silk pillows and draperies. Oh, well.
Well, I mean, Hand in Hand had a lot of high production value films, like Centurions of Rome, the most expensive porn movie ever. What kind of budget did that have?
I think it was like $150,000 or something like that. And it was all taken from a Brinks truck robbery.
Yeah. I actually wrote a review of that when it came out for Gay Community News. And my opening line was that this is the best porno movie ever made using horses in non-acting roles.
I mean, what was it like writing porn reviews? I mean, just watching a lot of, especially once things stopped becoming narrative.
I actually became sort of famous as the person who wrote reviews about the plot and the dialogue and not what people did.
Nice.
Well, because, you could just, people did what they did. That was obvious. But I found more as a cultural historian, I found it more interesting to look at whatever plots there were, vague plots or sort of signifiers. I mean, it was fine. I reviewed maybe 5 or 6 a month for the guide. Centurions of Rome was a special one that actually was in Gay Community News along with the Artie Bresson films, and I think some of the Peter DeRome movies because they were art.
Art. That was the first.
I don't know whether George knows this. I think speaking of soundtracks, I believe that
Jack DeVoe's Drive.
Jack DeVoe Drive is the only film that it actually, it's not on the DVD of it, I believe, but Ellen Greene was hired to sing the theme song.
That's right. I forgot that, right. Yeah, she was a good friend of Jack.
Yeah, although I believe at some point the song was taken off of the VHS and the DVD versions.
Really?
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's,
I knew there was a connection with Ellen Greene there, but I didn't know that she actually worked on the film.
Yes, she did it. It wasn't stolen. There was a film that Jack made, I don't know how he let it go by, but it was a film with a soundtrack by Frank Sinatra singing Green Sleeves. I mean, how insane could he be? I mean,
Yeah, there's actually a film, I'll think of the name of it later on tonight, I'm sure. I remember seeing it that actually had most of the musical soundtrack for All About Eve on it.
Well, speaking of Centurions of Rome, if you ever want to hear the Star Wars soundtrack over a Caligula ripoff, that's where you go for that.
Uh-huh.
The Imperial March over like a sex scene.
That's a hot tip. That's better than Pink Floyd over the Wizard of Oz, right there. Any more questions from the audience? No? Yes? Anybody? So maybe wrapping up, I want to thank everyone for coming. We are going to extend the run of Ask Anybody with the film festival. We're going to have it run to the end of the festival, just so everyone gets a chance to experience the cultural fantasia that is Ask Anybody. I do want to thank Evan for you joining us and chatting with us. Joan and Michael and George as well, thank you so much for being part of this. If you are interested in our schedule, go to wickedqueer.org and find out more about the full schedule, buy tickets. We are running until the 2nd of August. There's lots of stuff to be seen. We are an all-volunteer organization. If you do want to be either involved as a programmer or donate, go to the website. There's links there. And I thank everyone for coming out tonight and joining us for this chat about Ask Anybody. Thank you.
good.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.